Armor Core Kaneu Reeves Dungeons & Dragons, and is that Arnold Schwarzenegger totally getting his ass kicked Amazon secret level, is an ambitious new 15-episode adult animated anthology series from Tim Miller, the guy who brought us Deadpool, Love, Death, and Robots. And we don't talk about that as a video game fan who actually did live in his mom's basement for several years. This show was right up my list, but is it any good, or should Amazon just say, game over man, it's game over? So sometimes a trailer for a game can be better than the game itself. And the reasoning is fairly simple. It takes the best parts of a game and distills it down to a few short endorphin-packed minutes. It has high production values, there are no mechanics to hinder the experience, and it usually leaves you wanting more. Secret Level has taken the essence of a trailer and created something special that has never been done before, an anthology that is a love letter to video games and the people that play them. Before we get into our full thoughts on the show, no, there won't be any major spoilers, and yes, the Concord episode is still in Secret Level, and sadly, it is one of the best episodes in the anthology. There is such a great lore and universe that Firewalk Studios created, and it's very unfortunate that we won't be able to experience it if you want to avoid even the smallest spoilers. I can safely say that if you have even the slightest love for video games, you will find a lot to like about Secret Level. Secret Level is an anthology from Blur Studio that features 15 episodes dedicated to some of the most iconic names in gaming and some other inclusions that I'll talk about later. If you aren't familiar, Blur has been making some of the best gaming cinematics for decades now and have made a name for themselves working on some of the biggest franchises in the world, including Call of Duty, Halo, and Grand Theft Auto. It's fitting that Secret Level is brought to us from the people behind Love, Death, and Robots, because at the thematic core of this anthology, each episode is either about love, death, and a robot. Secret Level also shares the same blueprint with a wide range of episodes that range from 8 minutes to 17 minutes per episode, with the whole anthology being just over 3 hours. Secret Level is an addicting experience, and I would be shocked if you don't binge the whole anthology in one sitting. The episodes are snacks, sees the quality is high, and they were over before you knew it, which leaves you wanting more. Within seconds, it becomes apparent that the production value of Secret Level across the board is beyond reproach. Every aspect of Secret Level is pristine, the visuals are stunning, the voice acting is superb, sound direction is immersive, and the score is epic. The score for each episode actually stood out with how on point it was for each franchise. With Dungeons & Dragons, it created an epic and fantastical world with an orchestral focus, while on Unreal Tournament, the score was more electronic, which was more in line with the nature of the game and the generation when it was in its prime. Some of the episodes on Secret Level stay fairly close to the source material and deliver a story similar to what you would expect. However, on some other episodes, Blur takes the liberty to create an original story by stepping outside of the box. Packman comes to mind, which I won't spoil, as well as Unreal Tournament, which you might think might be about nothing more than eye-popping pyrotechnics with a shallow story. But then you are met with one of the more engaging episodes about an AI uprising that begins with one robot similar to Chapey. I would love to have been a fly on the wall for the creation of Secret Level. How is the order of episodes chosen? And why did they pick some of these games that were included? There are obvious answers like Crossfire from Tencent and New World Aeternum from Amazon. These make sense for funding purposes and the simple connection with Prime Video, where Secret Level will be exclusively streaming. But what about games like Sifu from Slow Clap and Spelunky from Mossmouth? How did these small indie developers also get included? Some of the games, no matter how iconic they were, like Packman, felt a little fracture from the rest of the anthology. And even the source material itself, the episode was very good and featured a very unique take on the Pac-Man universe, but I did wonder why it was included with Love, Death, and Robots. I never knew what the art style of each episode was going to be. However, most episodes of Secret Level had a very similar look, with the exception of a few episodes. I don't think it's a coincidence that Sifu and Spelunky, two of the better episodes of the anthology, also featured unique art styles from the rest of the series. These episodes felt like a breath of fresh air. When Secret Level was at its best was when it was able to take a microscope to the franchises that we love and told us stories that focused on the minutiae and was able to expand upon the knowledge that we're already familiar with, like when the Armored Core episode took a look at the life of one specific pilot. These stories were captivating, and I think that's why the PlayStation-focused episode stood out from the crowd in the wrong way. The other area of strength for the series was the direct tie-ins to actual games. I might not be one of the 5 million people who have played Space Marine 2 so far, but learning about the backstory of Lieutenant Titus and his origins, not only did this episode feature some of the strongest visuals and sound direction, but it also featured one of the more fascinating stories of the entire anthology. Obviously, as good as Secret Level was, I just wanted more. Some of the episodes were only 8 minutes, which was over before you knew it. Secret Level is a massive success for 3 simple reasons. First, you don't need to know anything about the source material to enjoy each episode. Second, if you don't know about it, it makes you want to learn more and find out. Finally, If you already know about the source material, it still finds ways to surprise you or teach you more about a universe that you already love. It might not be a perfect first season, however, most of the criticisms of the show are only ways that we could hope that it would improve if we're lucky enough to get a second season. If you're unaware of how screeners work, they include your name or email right in the middle of the screen so that you can't pirate the show. Now I bring this up because I couldn't think of a better endorsement to leave you with than by saying how in most episodes I didn't even notice this, because Secret Level is that good. Secret Level is a celebration of the medium that is unlike anything before it, and if you have any type of affinity for video games, Secret Level is a must-watch. Now we're going to take a deep dive into the first episodes, with the next batch of episodes coming out a week later. I've left timestamps below so you can check out all your favorite episodes. Our first episode is based off wildly successful 1974 tabletop game Dungeons & Dragons, with the episode itself, The Queen's Cradle, primarily inspired by modules for a storyline called The Tyranny of Dragons. And I say inspired because while the events of The Queen's Cradle tie closely to the war and history of campaigns like Horde of the Dragon Queen and The Rise of Tiamat, the events here aren't actually ones that happen in those campaigns. But hey, what's D&D without your players taking everything you painstakingly planned for weeks and going in completely the opposite direction? So everything begins with a party of adventurers arriving at an encampment where a young boy covered in tattoos is being held in a cage. And be warned, this is one of those gritty, serious D&D campaigns, which honestly is unusual, because most campaigns start like this: high and poop MC Dingle-S, now the cage boy, who goes by the name Solon, is continuously tortured by visions of the lawful evil goddess Tiamat, a unique chromatic dragon with one head for each of the most common species of chromatics: black, blue, green, red, and white. Her presence is even foreshadowed in the stars right at the beginning of the episode. Now, as Solon awaits his fate, the adventuring party descends on the camp, declaring that these are hallowed lands protected by the great Oriel, who we'll see at the end. However, these foes are cultists from the cult of the dragon, whose main mission is basically to summon Tiamat and bring about a time of draconic rule. In one way, they tried to entice Tiamat into the material plane, the plane of existence this episode takes place in, was through human sacrifice. So they're not exactly itching to give up the boy with the dragon tattoo. Now, after a battle that sees the paladin, monk, wizard, and druid free the boy, the already rolls a nat 1 on their perception check and fail to see a dire bat's SP following them and revealing their location. To a lich, meanwhile, as they take a long rest, the monk reveals that the tattoos seem to mark this boy for sacrifice at the Well of Dragons, basically a fortress for the cult of dragons in a volcano. Solon continues to fight visions of Tiamat and even stabs the paladin in his hysteria, believing he's actually piercing one of Tit's eyes. But after a quick lay-on-hand spell, the wizard laments not having a cleric in the party, and the paladin tells the boy he must be strong-willed if he's been able to endure such a curse. The paladin Mora gives Solon as symbol of Torm, the god of duty, loyalty, righteousness, obedience, law, and during the time period this is likely set, the war god of courage and self-sacrifice. The party then spots the dire bat and a band of cultists following them and race to Oriel, who the paladin believes can cure so long. And in the ensuing battle between the party and the cultist, we get a sequence chock full of D&D spell references. And forgive me as I nerd out. Here the druid casts Gust of Wind to block off the attackers. The lich cast Ice Storm. The monk uses Deflect Missiles. The lich snaps his finger to counterspell the wizard, and the druid uses Polymorph on the lich, so the wizard can unleash every spellcaster. Wet Dream. Oh, come on, you set up the most commonly referenced DD spell ever, and instead go with this. Got to remember that this is a serious campaign, and not one full of players like Fartbuckle the Goblin RP, but as the rest of the party holds off the lich, the paladin takes Solon to Oriel, an ancient gold dragon who is typically lawful good and a foe to evil forces. Oriel states that he can take whatever is inside Solon and destroy it, magically pulling the cursed markings off of him and absorbing it himself. However, Oriel quickly begins to react to this pulled curse somehow. This little human had held in a power so great that even Oriel can't contain himself. The gold dragon straight up dies, leaving scales of gold cascading from his hide, and none other than Tiamat herself emerges from his belly like, oh no. And as TMT rains down dragon breath on the party, Solon draws up a protection spell, likely using the symbol of Torm as a holy symbol spellcasting focus. And so the party finally has its cleric, although I'm not entirely sure what spell this is supposed to be, as it mainly resembles a whiz or sorcerer spell called Globe of Invulnerability. I'll dip back into 3rd edition spells and say this is Hand of Tor, considering all the Tor stuff, which is sort of a protection spell for clerics and paladins. And we did see a similar protection field coming from the paladin earlier. Hit up the comments, though, if you know what this spell might be. And that's where this episode ends, almost like a setup for some home-brewed TMT campaign with your classic party of 4. And of course a DM NPC with mystical abilities that surpass everyone else's, because DMSB Power, Tripping Secret Level 2nd installment, is based off the 2022 beat 'em up Sifu. And like the game, the Secret Level episode follows a similar story. A young child, the son of a martial arts master, watches as a group of disgraced former students murder his father and then himself. But what the show doesn't really explain is this ancient talisman whoever wields it can resurrect from the dead, but at the cost of growing exponentially older in the game. Our unnamed protagonist, known simply as MC, or main character in the show, wakes up after being killed and spends the next 8 years training to take on the men who killed his father. This is where the events of the episode begin. MC has been scoping up the area for the past 5 days, having tracked his targets to a local nightclub known simply as the Club. Who he's really after is a man known as Sean, one of 5 main bosses from the game. Because this is a short film, they've done away with the other 4 villains from the game and focused solely on him. His character design is similar to that the game, with his bandages and staff. However, we don't get to see how he can manipulate fire. Now MC dies several times in his quest to reach Sean. For each death, a coin from his talisman breaks, and he gets older. But this also comes with wisdom. For example, in one of his fights, he slips on blood, which results in his death. But when he resurrects, he knows to watch out for that blood, leading to his victory. When MC reaches the final boss, you'll notice he has 2 coins left. However, when we see him in the final shot, he has only 1, and he's gotten markedly older, so much so that initially the old lady from the beginning of the story doesn't recognize him. The 1 remaining coin suggests he died once while facing off against Sean. But notice this green bracelet. It's the same green bracelet that Sean was wearing and once belonged to his father all those years ago. He has reclaimed what was his in this story of revenge. But it's the old lady who questions MC's revenge, asking him if it was worth it. When she sees how this old man sitting before her opens his chopsticks is identical the way the young man did at the beginning, she understands it's the same person, whereas she spent the last 60 years of her life pouring her love into cooking. MC spent it on revenge. He got what he wanted, but his life has literally wasted away. The episode ends with the viewer having to answer this question for themselves. Is revenge worth it? As we pull back to reveal the reflection of her character's younger self, compare this silent, somber, and empty image to the vibrance, vitality, and energy from the beginning. I think it's pretty clear how the writer and director would answer this question. Episode 3 totally caught me off guard, and not because I had no idea Arnold Schwarzenegger was voicing King Allstrom, but it arguably has the most heartwarming ending based off New World, a 2021, a massive online role-playing game created by Amazon. It tells the origin story of King Arm, an actual quest giver from the game. If you're familiar with New World, he's one of the first people you'll encounter when you wash ashore on Aeternum, the main location of the game. So it kind of makes sense the episode ends with him literally on the beach ready to meet your character as you wash ashore. But the thing I really like about this particular episode is its emphasis on character. When it comes to screenwriting, your character needs to want something they desire more than anything else. In this case, King Allstrom wants to be king of Aeternum. Then to create conflict, you need an obstacle. In this case, it's King Zema who bests him at every possible challenge. But what really elevates a character is when they have a flaw, learn to overcome it, and it makes them a better character at the end of the story. This is called character arc, and King Allstrom is a great example at the beginning of the tale. He's cocky, stubborn, and arrogant, taking his friend Skava for granted. He even makes fun of him for only having 1 hand. But by the end of the story, he's learned that friendship is more important than the crown, literally forging a crown he stole from the king to make his friend a new hand on a Tumir resurrected upon death, allowing Allstrom to fail many times and learn the error of his ways. He even resorts to aligning with a sorcerer, granting him dark powers which are easily dealt with. But it's the moment his servant Skava offers him a hand, even after he's been treated so poorly by Allstrom, that he begins to really change. He spends what could be years learning how to forge alongside Era, another quest giver from the game. We'll see a lot of time has passed as part of the ship he crashed ashore with, is now buried under the sand. Aem's changes paralleled with the world itself, with the beginning of the tale, a violent raging storm, and the end of calm scenic sunset. Allstrom also goes from talking about himself in the third person, referring to Skava, not as Alstrom's friend, but as my friend, a much more personal and heartwarming connection than what we saw at the beginning. But what did you think of this one? Did the weird lip-syncing issues bother you? Did the comedy in Tunland let me know? When it comes to first-person shooters, Unreal Tournament has a history going back to the late 1990s, and if you're as old as me, you remember late-night LAN parties, destroying your friends and asking your mom for more Hot Pockets, ma'am. Yes, More Hot Pockets. This episode follows a malfunctioning mining droid named and based off the video game character of the same name, who would go on to be Unreal Tournament's first champion. He watches as his fellow droids are exploited, abused, and killed by the Leandri Mining Corporation, the company that will end up bringing these tournaments to the mainstream in 2291 when consensual murder becomes legalized. The tournament we see in this episode is most likely illegal, and that's because the last date we see on our human body cams during the mech uprising is 2283. 8 years before murder is legalized. These tournaments were initially put together as a way for the mining companies to channel the aggression of the mining worlds. Ultimately, Zan and his rebellion are brought to heel by Leandri and forced to participate in this tournament as part of a group known as the Corrupt. He'll fight against other game characters like Malcolm, an engineered warrior created by a company called Fintech in UT lore. Malcolm is the first character to defeat the undefeated champion Zan, and we do get a little nod to that with Malcolm defeating him here. If you're a hardcore Unreal Tournament fan, there are tons of references to the game from the arenas themselves, the weapons, and even sound design. First, we'll get to see the reptilian race known as Scar, and this Necrus captain, the Necrus, are a subject of debate in Unreal Tournament. Since in Unreal Tournament 1 they're described as an alien race, but in Unreal Championship 2 Necrus are I&D individuals who have died and been brought back to life. The Game Master refers to this Necrus captain as a nanotech augmented human who is the property of the Fader Corporation, the company that does this process. So it looks like this is the direction this episode took. In fact, the Leandri Corporation uses this Necrus process to keep fan-favorite combatants alive and ends up dominating the tournament, eventually bypassing the arena's firewall, allowing him to control the entire arena. But it's not just the arena he's turned to his will, but the very people themselves. The crowd chants "Rebel" as the Game Master is brought to heel, and a video of her calling the onlookers low lives plays on the big screen. It suggests a far larger conflict brewing, however. One thing I would have liked to have more context on, especially those unfamiliar with the Unreal Tournament universe, is what kind of universe we're living in. I wanted to see more of this hyper-corporate dystopia where giant corporations and the military dominate over the common man in order to really nail home this rebellion at the end. But what did you think? Up next is Warhammer 40k, which is an interesting one since Amazon is apparently in development with Henry Cavill to make their own Warhammer show. But in the meantime, we get this absolutely gore-filled homage to the 1987 miniature war game of the same name. This has spawned countless video games, with the most recent being the pretty well-received Space Marine 2. The episode begins with a voice-over from Blade Guard Sergeant Mattis, voiced by one of my favorite Lost characters, Mr. Echko. He talks about how the Imperium EV Last Galaxy, spanning human empire central to the game, selects children to mold into soldiers to conquer worlds. Mattis, whose name is derived from a famous battle between Rome and Carthage, chose a child filled with pain and rage, wondering what a child who had never known fear could be capable of. At the end of the episode, we'll see exactly who that child became and just what they can achieve for Ultramarines genetically. Enhanced superhuman warriors belonging to the Imperium are tasked with destroying an apostate relic on the planet Shag. This is a suicide mission, with the projected mortality being absolute. The planet is home to chaos cults, terrifying, mysterious zealots who worship the chaos gods to bring down the mortal civilizations of the known world. In the credits, we'll see that the main Biguai is a sorcerer of Cinch, and apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Cinch is a major god of chaos, and it looks like his sorcerer can manipulate time and space. This is foreshadowed with things like this paper forming out of ash and liquid floating upward from the ground. The Ultramarines are completely overqualified, absolutely crushing their enemies until they reach the apostate relic they've come to destroy. However, they finally meet their match with this sorcerer. With them is an astropath whose psychic abilities and powers form a protective barrier around the Marines. However, he is made quick work of by the sorcerer. One by one, the Marines are killed by this sorcerer, who can bypass their suits and crush their bodies inside. But what the story has hinted at is that one of these soldiers, Titus, is that kid who was recruited who had no fear. This is Demetrian Titus, who will go on to become commander of the Ultramarines' second company. So we can assume that when the story ends and he's ready to take on a whole planet of enemies, he survives this ordeal. It's implied that Titus's inability to experience fear is what allowed him to break free of the sorceress's spell and ultimately defeat her. Muris tells Titus that it's time to go, but Titus is a man without fear. It was the very reason Muris chose him. So it's a fitting end when Titus chimes back, "Not yet, old man," as a swarm of enemies come their way. I got to admit, the Packman episode totally caught me off guard with its absurd and ultra-violent take on the beloved 1980 classic. We follow a character known as the Swordsman, who is led by an entity called Packman, was the original name of Packman in Japan. Our Swordsman is dropped into this strange and dangerous world, as Puck hammers home the fact that in this world it is eat or be eaten, obviously a major theme of the Pac-Man game. We'll even see references to Barry's ghost-like creatures and labyrinths. Puck tells the swordsman he's the chosen one who will escape the maze and open the door, but Puck hides a disturbing secret. She is merely using the swordsman to devise her own escape in the episodes. Climax: the swordsman faces off against a giant creature who I believe is the manifestation of one of these ghosts, and he is easily defeated. This was all part of Puck's plan to weaken him and bury herself into his back, effectively acting like the game power pellets which allow Pac-Man to turn against the ghosts and devour them. But just as Puck is about to make her way out of the maze, the swordsman rips her out of his chest, ending its control over him, but also killing him. It wasn't the swordsman who was trapped, but Puck noticed how she taps on the exit's closed door, almost as if she is banging her head. She repeats the line, there's strength and repetition. Like every time we play the game, we get a little better at it. Who knows how many times Puck has been unsuccessful at exiting the main, and who knows how many of these swordsmen she sacrificed. The human-like figure etched on the exit door hints that the only way out is with one of these swordsmen, so Puck goes back to the beginning to manipulate another one and try her luck once more. Just like when we die in the game, we start all over again, hoping to do better with the knowledge we acquired. I have to admit that going into Crossfire, I knew very little about the game, but upon doing research, I had no idea that up until 2014, it was the world's top-grossing online game with huge popularity in Asia. This first-person shooter was released in May of 2007 and is still being played today. The premise of this episode is pretty simple. Two rival factions seek for control over this briefcase. These factions come directly from the game, include Global Risk, a private military company composed of EX soldiers and veterans, and they want to preserve order and stability. Then there's the Blacklist, a rebellious organization who claims to fight for liberty and against corruption. Both sides think they're the good guys, and this is something you'll hear the characters say all throughout the episode. Notch 1 for the good guys. We're not the bad guys. We're not the bad guys. We're not the bad guys. It makes me think of that saying, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. Set during a torrential rainstorm in a fictitious South American city. The client, who is under the protection of Global Risk, is hunted by rival group the Blacklist. This client once worked for the Blacklist and calls himself a turncoat, wanting to trade in this briefcase so he can live out the rest of his days sipping cocktails on a beach. This briefcase can be found in the Crossfire game, most notably as an object in the multiplayer search and destroy game mode. And just like in the game, we never really find out what's in that briefcase. It could be anything from secret documents, a bomb, or nuclear codes. At the end of the episode, Layla, who works for Global Risk and who you may recognize as Victoria Newman from The Boys, essentially allows the Blacklist to take the briefcase as she escapes with the client. This is because their contract with him only said they had to protect him and not the case attached to him. So that gunshot we hear at the end is the Blacklist soldier shooting the handcuff, allowing the briefcase to be separated from the client. In my opinion, this was one of the weaker entries in the first 8 episodes, but let me know what you thought in the comments below. Our final entry in the first batch of episodes is from the Armored Core series and stars someone who is no stranger to video games. You just discovered what it takes to become a legend. Reeves VO is a character known simply as Pilot, a pilot of, well, you guessed it, an Armored Core. Armored Core, the game first appeared in 1997 by From Software, the same guys who made Elden Ring. It went off to spawn many installments, with the latest 2023 is Armored Core 6. This episode appears to take place on Rubicon 3, the setting for Armored Core 6 with its frigidly barren landscapes. We start on a small colony bar bathed in green, a color commonly associated with sickness. Pilot definitely gives off sick vibes as he struggles with drugs, alcohol, and basic social norms. Old Salt, played by Tamura Morrison, says they don't make guys like Pilot anymore. He seems to be based off the character 621, also known as Raven from Armored Core 6. We'll even see that he has a Raven tattoo, and his AC or Armored Core has one as well. Pilot also has to contend with his voice in his head, which he says is the result of a few grams of unstable isotopes, a result of a now obsolete type of augmentation surgery. He gets into his AC named Shreer, which is a type of AC first introduced in 2008's Armored Core for answer dispatch, sends Pilot on a mission to take out a target within a mountain, and we get to see just how linked the pilots are to these cores. It's as if the ACs are an extension of the pilot. What transpires is a fast-paced action sequence in which Pilot takes on various enemy cores as he makes his way to this secret lab, where he makes a terrifying discovery. This is a lab where augmented humans like him were created, and those other mech pilots he was fighting are of his own kind. The voice inside Pilot's head even refers to them as his people. And she goes on to say, he was, quote, remade in a lab like this. Is it possible these mechs didn't want to kill him, rather show him where he came from? And instead of Pilot embracing this, he says, They're nothing like him, nobody's like me. He crushes the head of the mech pilot in an act of defiance, cementing himself as his own person. But it begs the question, is this really his own choice? Or is someone else pulling the strings? Was the dispatcher who took him on this mission real? Or was it the voice inside his head? Remember, when he orally gets the call for the mission, the voice predicts the incoming call a few seconds before it arrives, incoming 2 seconds, which pilot thinks is strange. How do you do that? Do what? I wasn't talking to you then. At the end of the story, we hear a menacing sounding voice correct pilot, saying nobody's like us. While pilot may control the armor core, it appears the voice controls the pilot, making for a deep and unsettling commentary on how much choice we really have in our own decisions. But what do you think of armor core in the first batch of episodes? I'm looking forward to the next latest, especially considering one of the episodes is based off Concord, which has already gone offline, making it the second shortest lived online game of all time. So I hope you'll stick around for my video on, and thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. And for more bad takes, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at GasGaming2024YT. Until next time, remember, thank you very much.